And I'm looking sexy.
This episode is sponsored by Component One, makers of Widgmo. If you need stunning UI elements or awesome graphs and charts, then go to widgmo.com and check them out. This episode is sponsored by Gaslight Software. They're putting on a Mastering Backbone training in San Francisco at the Mission Bay Conference Center, December 3rd through 5th of this year. This 3-day intensive course will forever change the way you develop the front end of your web applications. For too long, many web developers have approached the front end as drudgery. No more. We'll help you build the skills to write front-end code you can love every bit as much as your server-side code. Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 33 of the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, yo, yo. Coming at you live from the DJ sphere of Orem, Utah.
We also have Jamison Dance.
Oh gosh, it gets worse every time. I'm sorry, AJ. Your intro is so good.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Trek Glowacki.
Oh, very, very close. Good job.
You want to straighten it out for us?
You can just call me Trek. Everyone does.
Okay. How many generations removed are you from Poland or whatever?
So weirdly enough, I'm a first-generation American, so my parents are foreign. But my dad is Belgian, not Polish, nationally, but of Polish descent.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
My driver's license is weird and everything is misspelled. My voter registration is spelled wrong. It's kind of a nightmare. It's why I just go by Trek. I try to snag at Trek as a user handle everywhere, so I'm at Trek on Twitter. It just makes my life easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have to say that if your voter registration is messed up, I hope you're voting for that other guy. And I'm not going to be specific about my political leanings because I don't want to start a firestorm on a programming podcast for that, so we'll just leave it there. Anyway, we're going to be talking about Ember.js today. Now, I know that Yehuda and Tom Dale work on it. Do you work on it too, or are you just kind of an expert user?
A little bit of both. So I hang out of the secret volcano base that we have with Yehuda and Tom. And my contributions
that's why your audio quality is so good.
Yeah, we're at the volcano base. It's really beaming to a really satellite in space.
Yeah, VolcanoNet is awesome.
So my contributions are usually documentation and article writing. And I just got started in that because I was just trolling Yehuda on Twitter about Ember. And he was very patient to a point and then just stopped responding to me. And after that, I was like, all right, I'm just going to have to learn this myself. And I just started reading through the code. And Ember actually has very well-written code. But 6-7 months ago when I started writing docs, wow, even more than that, 9 months ago when I started writing docs for it, very little inline documentation. So I beefed that up quite a bit.
Yeah. So let's just get into it and start talking about it. One of the things that I remember hearing about initially with Ember was that it was based on SproutCore. It was supposed to be SproutCore 2, and then it evolved into something more different than that.
I'd say the SproutCore pedigree is mostly for tossing the guy a bone. Like a lot of the run loop stuff was definitely inspired by SproutCore. Very little of the code that exists now, I think, was in SproutCore, either 1 or 2. Very, very different. And SproutCore's whole shtick was, widgets and desktop-like experience, and that is definitely not, I think, a pattern that people like generally, and that's definitely not something that any of the modern JavaScript frameworks are going with, Ember included in that.
I think it depends. I think when you deal with people who come from a background sort of like what most of the people I think on this podcast come from, where it's Ruby or Node.js, and you kind of have full control of the stack and things like that. Yeah, they tend to like the frameworks that are more oriented around like data management and things like that, and don't give you that application look and feel. Where I'm working for a client right now that is much more into the enterprise thing. They came from a .NET background, and they really, if it's not .NET, they kind of like the Java stuff. And so they're much more about some of the frameworks that give them more of that application look and feel. So we're actually using Next.js for all of our stuff, and it gives it that. Yeah, we're building Windows XP apps in JavaScript is what we're doing.
Oh, wow.
That's what they look like anyway. So
they're in the browser, but yeah, they look like they belong in Windows XP.
yeah, well, they're a cheap knockoff of Windows XP kind of style. They're freaking ugly, but they hired some designers to make them pretty. But that's beside the point. This is more of here's your data. We're going to bind it to stuff. We're going to manage the interaction between it and the backend server and things like that. Right.
Right.
Now I know. The way I know Yehuda is that we've interacted at some of the Ruby conferences, and it seems like I've heard a few people kind of talk about Ember like it's the Rails of JavaScript, front-end JavaScript. Is that fair?
Yeah, probably not. I'd say that's probably not a fair comparison. I think people say that just because the code base is fairly large, although much smaller than the Rails code base. I think it gets the moniker of magical because the framework handles a lot of things for you, which is obviously a very Rails-like pattern. Mm-hmm. But it's not like Rails started that pattern. They did definitely popularize it. So it has a lot of the same players in it. I think a lot of the people who are using Ember to write UIs in the browser also use Rails as a backend. So there's definitely a lot of like cross pollination from that. But I also use Rails, and I don't think it's a fair comparison.
Right. I have to wonder, and this is something that came up, I think we were talking about todomvc. They've given these examples. I think Yehuda pointed out that todomvc really isn't a great showcase for what Ember gives you. So I'm a little curious as to what is, and then maybe we can talk about why that is and what Ember actually does for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with Yehuda that todomvc is not a great demonstration of what Ember does. So most Ember developers, at least the ones that I've met, also are professional Backbone developers, which often comes as a surprise to people. People think of the situation really being Ember versus Backbone versus Angular. And in fact, they're just very different tool sets used to build very, 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 very different kind of applications. So Backbone, to start with the counterpoint, is great for interactions where the user is coming in. It's a casual interaction, usually very brief. The types of interactions involve a fairly flat view hierarchy, not a lot of deep state changes, and then the user usually leaves after a short amount of time. And Backbone is like, that's the sweet spot for it, right? It gets to be very simple, clean code in the framework because it can make assumptions like the application isn't going to be running for an entire day. So it can deal with memory management issues by basically saying, and this isn't true about everything, I'm not trying to knock Backbone's memory management, but they do have a huge advantage of just being able to say like, well, eventually someone's going to leave this page and all the objects will be garbage collected. And Ember applications, I think, the types of things people are writing with them are longer running. People will spend all day sitting in them, working in them. And usually the application, as you interact with it, has deep view hierarchy changes in reaction to your data coming in or in reaction to user behavior.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I've looked at Ember quite a bit. I mean, like you said, there are a lot of Rails folks that use it, and it gives you a lot of that magic and things that do the things that you want it to. One of the things that really appealed to me that I didn't get out of Backbone was, and you've really touched on this, is that it kind of manages all of your objects for you, so that if you change or try to retrieve an object one way or the other, it maintains it itself and keeps it consistent across multiple widgets or multiple views. And with Backbone, if you go and retrieve it again, you might get different data back, and you kind of have to manage that consistency yourself.
Right, exactly. And you can totally do that in Backbone. Like, I'm not saying, obviously, you can't build large applications in Backbone, because a lot of people do. But you do take a lot of that pain and those extra requirements on yourself. And yeah, Ember does a lot of data management just for you, with the assumption that when an object updates, any visual representations based on that object should also update.
Right. And like you're saying, it's really nice in the sense that if I want to do something with Backbone.js just because I have some quick, dumb little app that I want to throw together that really is designed for, okay, you do a handful of interactions and you're done, or I have a small set of data that I can really just keep in memory myself and not really worry about too complex of interactions between it and other objects, then Backbone's great, and it's so slick and so minimal that it really does a great job of that. But yeah, it seems like if you're getting into a more complex with a high number of references between your different objects and things like that, and a large amount of data that you have to manage, then Ember is much more the way to go.
At least that's what I've found, and I think that bears fruit. If you look at the type of applications that people use each framework for, Backbone definitely ends up being used a lot more like Foursquare's maps and lists, or like the interactive parts of Airbnb. Very user-focused, casual interactions. Someone's going to come to the site, spend maybe 20, 30 seconds on it, and then move on to another experience, possibly within that same application. And if you look at the stuff that Ember's being used to build, so I work at Groupon, and we have an external-facing product called Groupon Scheduler, and it's essentially appointment-based business help for things like hairdressers, massage therapists, and there's an expectation that customers will be spending their entire day in this. Square's web properties, their sort of analytics tool, the redesign Zendesk, just things that are very often internal-facing, but sometimes customer-facing, and that someone spends hours and hours and hours in.
Right. So I'm also wondering, and I haven't played with some of the aspects of Ember, but what if you only want the data aspect of it? You don't want the other parts that render out the pages or what, do the views and things like that. Can you just pull one piece out and use that and use something else for the rest?
Yeah, definitely. Ember is written very modularly, although we ship it as a single compiled source. There are like 5 or 6 separate libraries that work in tandem, and the object system and the metal layer is basically what you're talking about. And I think there's even like a Node package for people that want to use Ember's object system in Node. Not a thing I would do, but it's available. People have asked for it, so we made it modular.
Interesting. So what struggles do you see people having when they start playing with Ember?
Learning is tough for people for 2 reasons. One, I think our API documentation is much stronger than it was back in like January, February, where I think people really started to talk about Ember frequently, but our like guides and tutorials are still pretty lacking. We're still relying on community members to provide those for us, and that's tough. And the framework, we're still pre-release. It's not even in beta yet. We're still doing pre-releases, which means the API can and does change pretty frequently. So there's the router that got added like 6-7 weeks ago. People have been playing with that in applications, and we've gotten a lot of really good feedback about sort of the pain points and what works well, and we're considering redesigning the external-facing API. Internally, it'll behave pretty much the same, but it'll have a separate API where views, I think, are going to become sort of an optional thing that you implement if you want to respond to user events, and templates and state will be much closer tied to each other. So when you enter into an application and begin navigating through it, you're essentially expressing the desire to move the application into a different application state, and the template hierarchy should just update to reflect that. Right. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is the types of applications that Ember targets are usually new for people who have traditionally done web application development. Either they've been mostly on the server side and are starting to move into the client, or their client behavior has really been very DOM-focused, very page manipulation, essentially making, I think, what Jeremy Ashkenaz calls like islands of richness occur. And Ember is much more intended to take over the entire browser and treat it like a legitimate client platform in the same way that you would treat like an iPhone or Android phone or the desktop itself. So it's funny, we get people coming to us who have done traditional web development, and it seems very hard to them because they're very used to jQuery's event pattern. And so Backbone seems very approachable to them. And Ember seems difficult because there's a lot of new patterns that you need to pick up. But conversely, we get people who come from like Cocoa development, and they're like, oh, this is a dream. This is like a slimmed down Cocoa with all the cruftiness removed. Like, it's exactly just the pieces I want. And those two perspectives are just very amusing to me.
I'm hoping that Jamison or AJ will jump in with questions or comments, because I can sit here and throw questions all day.
I can jump in with a perspective as one of these Backbone developers that you talk about who has looked at Ember. We're writing a large persistent application in Backbone, and I've been looking at this page you posted in the show notes where you kind of go through the intro to Ember, I guess. and you show your kind of destructor function that cleans up all the memory stuff in your view. And we definitely have this code littered throughout our app. We've found that in testing, lots of weird things happen, and you have to basically do memory management in a memory managed language, which is weird. So the thing, I mean, that's appealing to me, where things get cleaned up automatically for you, because there's lots of gotchas in doing that well and correctly in Backbone. But the thing that appeals to me about Backbone is that it's such a small area of functionality to understand that it's really easy to focus 100% on implementing my app. Whereas with Ember, I feel like I have to spend weeks on Ember before I can actually go and get stuff done, because the surface area of functionality that it provides is so large and so different, like you said, from the normal like web developer tool set and experience. So basically, if I just want to go get stuff done, it's so much easier to use Backbone, where I don't have the time to invest in learning Ember for a couple weeks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I mean, it's always an investment you're gonna have to make when picking up a new technology, whether you want to spend the time or not. You know, the example I usually bring up to people is D3 versus Backbone, which sounds like a crazy comparison, but like you can use Backbone to drive SVG visualizations very, very easily, and yet D3 is a framework for doing visualizations in the browser that is specifically designed for that, and the learning curve for it is massive. I mean, it's a very difficult library to gain mastery of, but when you do, you're able to do much more complex visualizations with greater ease. And it's it's just a perennial problem with developers in general, right? There's always new technologies you're going to need to learn. You could also say that Backbone has a learning curve higher than just jQuery. It's pretty slim, and yet people are willing to pay that because they get payoff pretty quickly. But yeah, it is tough it's a tough sell for people to learn something that has quite a bit of a large API exposed to them. I guess you just have to trust that the people working on it are doing it for a good reason. And I think as there are more Ember applications in the wild, people are going to see the sort of quality of application that Ember lets you build very quickly, and are going to be willing to make that investment. I mean, the similar thing happened with Rails, right? Like people just didn't understand why you'd use Rails over something like PHP, and the sort of force multiplication that you get from using a framework once you've learned it is a huge advantage, especially when you work on teams or sort of picking a technology that you want to continue to use in your career for the next few years.
Yeah, we've also seen something similar with Rails versus Sinatra in Ruby, and Sinatra is really simple if you just want to spin up something fast. The flip side is the second that you have to deal with some of the complexity that's just built into Rails, you start to realize, okay, well, these apps over here that I've been building so far are really well suited to the simpler framework, and these apps over here, I want to build them in the larger framework, even though there is a little bit more of a learning curve in the sense that, the surface area of the API is a lot larger. The flip side is that it removes a lot of the pain you have. And so if you're going to be building an app that you wind up running into this pain, then you're going to want the larger framework. But that doesn't discount the value of the smaller framework when you have something that really just only needs the functionality in the smaller framework, because then the other one is kind of overkill.
I think some of this gets down to developer styles. Some people prefer like reinventing the wheel, and some people like building on top of other stuff. And I don't know, some people prefer small libraries, and then they invent a lot of the functionality on top of these small libraries. And some people like giant frameworks that do everything for them, and then you put little pieces of functionality on top of the framework. I don't know. I guess I lean towards...
I have to push back on that just a little bit. And really, for me, I'm a consultant. I build stuff for people, and that's how I get paid, as opposed to being in a full-time job. And my clients, they're paying me not only to build it right, but to build it quickly, and to make and the frameworks really pay off for that. So if I want it built right, and I know that that Ember.js handles all of the use cases that I need, and it will it'll allow me to move ahead more quickly, then that's great. But if I'm working on an application and it turns out that I don't need all of the features in Ember, that I can actually move ahead more quickly with Backbone, then I'll use Backbone. And I think what we're talking about here isn't developer style. I think in some situations, in some employment situations or application situations, where there's no pressure, then sure, you can reinvent the wheel all you want. But when you're in a pressure situation where they want it done quickly and correctly, then you're going to pick the right tool for the right job. And sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. And it's not down to your preference, it's down to what's going to work for the problem.
Well, I would love to see an employment situation with no pressure. Yeah. Tell me if they're hiring and I'll go there. I think there are different... So I agree with part of what you said, where if you're consulting, you need to get it done. I mean, you need to get it done right, yeah, but you also need to get it done as cost effectively as possible for the client. I work at a product company, and we are working like mad to get this product shipped. And there's a lot of benefit in us understanding every single step of the stack. And people talk about Backbone. It's so small that there's nothing to understand, right? So everything that exists in our app, like, we have done, and that's a plus and a negative. Like, it's a plus because we understand it all. It's a negative because maybe other people have done it in a better way. But it is appealing that, yeah, we have to do all this, like, event cleanup stuff and destroying elements manually when views get destroyed and stuff. But, like, we know that works because we did it. And we didn't have to go learn someone else's implementation of it.
Yeah, I would posit that's still part of the description of the problem, where you value, having built it yourself and understanding the full stack as opposed to using a stack that maybe you don't understand completely, but, trust the API. In any case, let's get back to Ember.
Yeah, I mean, so just to talk about this, like, you have to remember software projects continue to live over time, and, like, the code you have handwritten today totally makes sense to your team right now, but 6 months or 12 months from now, when it's a different set of people, possibly a different team, right? Like, they need to go into your app and learn everything from square one. Whereas if you'd been writing this in Ember and they were Ember, people who knew Ember already, the surface area that they need to understand for what is custom about your application is much, much smaller. And that makes skill sets just way portable. Like, I'd be very, very comfortable adding someone who knew Ember to my team and getting them up and running in almost no time at all. I wouldn't have to explain particular ways that we were doing memory management, or particular styles of programming, or particular organization techniques that we had, because I can just assume that they know that because they're an Ember developer. And that, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, and I guess you can't boil it down to just one thing or another. I mean, there are usually myriad reasons for using one tool or the other. I really want to get back to Ember.js and talk about some of the other features that it has. One that I'm really interested in is rendering. It seems like it does some pretty interesting magic with Ember.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interesting techniques we take. One of the first things that we wanted to do, and when I say we, I really mean the Ember people who spend a lot of time coding, not just me who writes most of the documentation, but to make sure that multiple data changes that could cause a view to render multiple times don't actually trigger multiple renders. Like, the DOM is extremely costly to draw into. If you have a lot of DOM nodes, it's going to slow down your application. Like, that is almost always the bottleneck. JavaScript itself is pretty speedy, especially in modern interpreters. So one of the things that Ember tries to minimize is if a particular element in the DOM is essentially needs to be redrawn when data changes, that we have a run loop that we run ourselves, and DOM drawing occurs fairly late in that run loop, which means we can aggregate data changes that are occurring and figure out exactly what DOMs need to be redrawn, and only what DOM sections only need to be redrawn, and only do that once instead of multiple times per data change.
So how do you do that? We just talked to the Angular people a while ago, and they do this thing where they just do dirty checking, because on every, like, callback, basically, they could have stuff change. So XHR requests, set timeouts and stuff.
I don't know sort of the deep internals. This is it's probably the part of the framework that I'm least familiar with. Yehuda would be better able to answer that, or Chris Selden, who has been the contributor doing a lot of the performance stuff for us. So I would just say magic.
Magic.
Right, and it seems like we've been getting into the philosophy maybe a little bit of some of these frameworks. So what is your take on philosophy? The philosophy of Ember?
Ember is definitely It's interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting question. What do you mean by philosophy? Maybe I need more clarification.
So, do you like magic? Do you not like magic? Do you care?
See, people often claim that it's magic, and maybe I just don't feel like that because I've taken a lot of time to read through the code and like I understand exactly what's happening and why it's happening. In the same way that like if you have a large code base that you've worked on and you abstract things out into helper classes or low level functionality that you don't deal with on a daily basis, like that doesn't seem magical to you, and because you typed it right. So essentially, you can treat Ember as if you had a team of highly paid programmers who did 95% of your project for you. And then just said, okay, you finish up the last part, the part with the user experience, and then we'll call it done.
Right. One other thing that gives me some confidence in the framework. I mean, you can go look at the APIs and get a feel for whether or not it makes sense to you. But my understanding is also that most, if not all, of Ember is actually tested using QUnit or something.
Yep, everything's tested with QUnit. We use Travis CI for continuous integration, so commits can't get in unless they pass tests. And we're if you go look at the open issues on Ember, they require a lot of discussion. So if someone submits a pull request, there's usually a lot of feedback of like, can you tell us about use cases? How do you envision other people using this? Have you looked at these parts of the framework to follow similar patterns? So we definitely are very strict about pull requests. You'll never see a pull request that'll RM, RF, user local in Ember. Knock on wood.
Oh, geez. that drama.
Yeah, but it's
you're not
a
in a
confidence
volcano.
builder for me.
You're in a pirate ship, captained by Captain Terrible Code.
There you go. Yeah, but that's a confidence builder for me because I can look at the API and say, okay, they've described it this way, and they have a test that verifies that it behaves this way. So, anyway, Jamison, I think you had another question.
Yeah, I remember hearing about the Ember router and how cool it was, and being too dumb to understand what it meant. I like glanced through blog posts and was like, "Oh, this is hard. I have stuff to do. I'll come back when I have more time." But it sounded really cool. Do you want to talk about how the Ember router works?
Yeah, definitely. I think the router is actually probably one of the most important features of the framework. When we say
it's funny that you say that because didn't you say that it just got put in like 6 or 7 weeks ago?
Yeah, it was a thing that people were solving. So I'll explain a little bit about what the router does, and how we've actually had a router almost since day one. So when most people say router, like a backbone router, what they really mean is like a URL string and then an anonymous function callback that gets executed when the browser matches that string, right? Mm-hmm. And in Ember, we actually drive application state through a formal state manager. So if you're not familiar with things like state machines, the learning curve can be pretty high. But I think you should learn what a state machine is anyway. I think once you learn it, you'll start using state machines in all sorts of projects. So I even use state machines in my Rails applications quite frequently. So we've had a state manager to manage application state for quite some time. But the request that kept coming in was like, okay, how do you tie this to URLs? How do you update a URL when a state changes? And there were some third-party libs that were doing that, and we finally rolled that functionality into the framework as a core concept. So essentially what the router does for us as a state manager is you define a finite number of states that your application can be in, and these can be nested. And then portions of your templates have dynamic sections, which we call outlets, attached to them. And when a user takes some action that would trigger a state change, these outlets can be dynamically filled with new content. And you can have as many outlets as you want in a template. They can be nested infinitely deeply. And it becomes an extremely expressive way to describe applications. It's kind of hard to explain with mouth noises, but visually you can explain it pretty simply. If only I had a virtual whiteboard I could share.
Right. So state machines, my understanding with state machines is, and I was an electrical engineering major in college, and we dealt with this all the time, but you have pretty simple state machines that, you just move from one state to the next, and you can basically be in just one state at a time, or you can have different components maybe in different states. But can you roll back data and stuff? We talked to a developer behind History.js. And so I'm wondering, when you roll back, can you roll back both like the the name of the state and the data to a former state, or is it just state changed?
So if you're using Ember data, which is like a sub-framework associated with Ember for doing server-client data synchronization, you can roll back data changes. In fact, locally, changes happen to objects basically in the browser, and then you can, as part of an exit condition on a state, say whether you want to commit those changes in a transaction or whether you want to just roll them back to what they were before the person entered the state.
So when I hear router, like most applications, routers just match URLs to some kind of function that gets called that like renders a view or does some functionality or whatever. And then you talk about a state machine. I have a hard time, understanding how that works and how it's different than just a regular router. So
go ahead.
I don't know. Can you revisit that again? Does that make sense?
No, it does, and I struggle to explain this to people because it is a subtle and nuanced thing, and it's very hard to explain verbally.
Because you could think of a regular, like the Backbone router, as a state machine where there's just one start state and then the end state is just the route. So there's like one little state at the beginning that has a bunch of different arrows that all point to the page that you get routed to, and then every time you revisit a route, you just go back to that start state and go to the next state.
That is basically how it works. I wish there was a great way of explaining this. Maybe I just need to write an article about it and use some pictures, because visually it makes a ton of sense. I think as a community, Ember's really struggled in explaining this to people and how expressive of a pattern it is. Probably the closest analogy I can think of is like the NVC pattern, and how splitting things out to like a router and then having particular controllers, like that wasn't new in Rails, but that became an extremely expressive way to talk about and organize applications. And explaining it to someone who is like, well, I don't understand what the difference is, because, in a PHP application, when you go to a particular URL, a particular PHP file loads and parses, and I don't see what the difference is. And man, it's just tough to talk about and explain.
Right. So Jamison asked a really good question in the back channel chat, and Yehuda's also in there and replying. But Jamison, can you ask your question? Because I think it's something that we really ought to talk about. Yeah,
so just to revisit what we were talking about earlier, I think I've been thinking about it while we were talking about other stuff. And I think my hang-up on large frameworks like this is I feel like the time I spend learning the framework is time that I'm not spending on becoming a domain expert in the problem I'm trying to solve. So if I have to spend such a long time learning the ins and outs of the framework solutions to problems, that's like less time thinking about what users need. And Yehuda replied that it probably shouldn't take me that long to learn it, so I'm maybe doing it wrong. But he said that if you're solving all these problems yourself, you're thinking about them anyways. And if you're using a framework, you're just seeing their solutions to problems that you might not have encountered yet, so it might be a little bit strange. But if you do a large enough app, you're going to find those problems anyways. So I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think it just boils down again to if Ember isn't solving enough of the right pain points for you, then yeah, you're wasting time learning about things you don't need. But if it solves enough of the pain points for you, then you'll learn how to solve those problems with Ember. And really, it's just a matter of learning the API instead of learning how to think about the problem and handling all the edge cases.
Yeah, and you have to remember that this learning curve is a price you pay once, right? Like, yeah, you have to take some time and you're not solving domain problems in your application because you're learning Ember, but that's just once, right? Like, so you take 2 weeks to learn Ember. It's not like you need to take 2 weeks to learn Ember for every application you write. And for particular types of application, it's really acting as a force multiplier. Whereas with Backbone, like, you need to learn these tricks, and you may decide you've written one application, and you may decide that like the way we did it just wasn't right. We were leaking memory, or we had zombie events, or it became hard at some point for our application to have a particular structure. Talking about it became difficult. Now you need to resolve those problems again on your next application, and that could be true too if you just don't agree with the particular decisions that Ember's making as a framework. It's always going to feel painful to you, but that's true of any framework. And usually the advice I give people is like, just sit back and enjoy it, right? Like there's a team of 20, 30 people who are basically spending all day building up Ember to be really, really good as part of their work of building an application. And it might just be that Ember is, just too early for people to jump in right now. But I don't think that's always going to be the case.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add or jump in with another question?
So I just wanted to make a very dirty comparison for a second, which is I think that frameworks, in some sense, what?
Does this podcast have the clean tag in iTunes? How dirty is this?
No.
It's not until about 5
I'm
minutes
going to compare it to
now.
WordPress.
Okay.
Oh,
go for
ouch.
No, but so think about it. Like, WordPress is not the right tool to solve every problem, but there's a community there that has managed to do something really well. And if you're building a website, do you want to use WordPress? Probably not. But it really suits a large group of people really well. And so I think the thing for the frameworks is when you're not looking to do very, very custom things, you're not looking to craft a site in an extremely customized way, then a framework can work really, really well. But the more specific you're trying to do, the more unique you are, the less perhaps your investment in learning a framework is worth. Like when I was working with Ruby on Rails, it was really great when I was first getting into it because it was easy to use, it was easy to get things set up. But then as I tried to get past the basics of it and really start customizing things very specifically for unusual purposes, that's where it kind of broke down and I hit the wall of magic.
The wall of magic. It's like this big rainbow shimmering curtain that you just run into and disappear. That's what I think of when you say that.
I mean, it's valid.
JavaScript's on the other side of that curtain.
Not every tool is a perfect job, and this is a tough sell when you especially when you're approaching people who are just sort of starting out programming. Like, you're going to need to learn Ember and Backbone and probably Angular and D3 and a good game development library. Like, this is just a cost you're going to have to pay because, like, yes, you could write a game in Backbone. Learn how to use Canvas yourself. It'll be exactly as you want. Or even just plain JavaScript, like Vim Adventures. That's just plain old JavaScript. And he just took on the work of figuring out how to draw to the canvas and do all that stuff himself. But if you plan on writing applications over time, like if you're making a career out of this, you're not going to be hurt learning these tools, even if all you get out of it is like, I picked up some neat tricks that I'm going to bring back to Backbone, but I don't see myself building the style of application that Ember really targets. And that's a fine lesson to learn too, but like, you can't, it's very hard when people they don't know how to invest their time, especially with so many products that seem like they're competitors.
Yeah.
So I have just one more little thing to contribute on this. Yesterday I had like a really tiny problem to solve that required a teeny tiny HTTP server. And I was like, I don't want to use Express for this. I'm just going to write it in Node with no libraries or anything, just because I haven't done this in a long time. And it took me like 40 times as long to do. Like, it would have been 5 seconds if I just used Express and made a little route and return stuff. But abstractions are nice. And it's also nice to go without them every once in a while to see, I ended up writing a little crappy implementation of a router, even though there's already a perfectly good router in Express. And I don't know. So I can kind of agree with you that there's definitely value in using abstractions that other people have built up.
And to comment on that, I want to add, take a look at the idea of the Canvas library, right? So it's really helpful to do both, right? It's helpful to have a library and it's helpful to have done it yourself. Which approach works best for you kind of depends on the way your brain works, right? Maybe it's easier for you to get into a library that does stuff with Canvas and then start pounding at it on your own so that you really know what's going on under the hood. But there's a right case for both. It's not like one or the other. There's going to be times when you want to write things by hand because you either get some particular benefit or because it's going to help you learn and appreciate better what the framework is doing when it's the right framework for that job.
Right, but you just have to be aware of all of the constraints on your project. So if you are time constrained, then spending 40 times as long doing something doesn't make sense. But if it's a mental exercise, then maybe it does.
So, but I'm going to argue that because I've found that it takes me just as long to learn someone's framework to do something generally as it does to build the pieces I need myself. Like the investment in the documentation it seems like it's pretty equal. So it's a matter of whether you're going to be using the tool over and over again.
I mean, that's a bold statement. You're not just talking obviously about Ember right now, but just tools in general, right? Like to assume that the amount of time and effort that went into a library can be reproduced in a much smaller amount of time by you just for the specific things you need. I find usually what that means is I'm forgetting things, or there are implementation details that I need to be thinking about that I'm not even aware that I need to be thinking about. And they won't come up until after I've launched and weird bugs start cropping up. And one of the benefits of using other people's code is like they've done that. This, like other people's code, especially when it's been used in production, has been battle tested. It's seen weird situations you don't think it could have come up. So I had a friend years and years and years ago when Rails first came out. He's like, I have a PHP framework I use myself that was kind of like that. I'm like, oh, so how do you handle like the cross-site scripting stuff? And it was just like blank-faced, just not a concept he had ever heard of. And I'm not claiming that I was some sort of security expert, but Rails, I think for a lot of people, brought those to the forefront. And before, people were unaware of various security things or strategies you can take to mitigate security problems.
It's like I said before, they solve problems you might not have thought of yet. So it seems like cruft or extra code or I don't know.
Yep.
But it's useful.
Yeah. And I won't argue with that. I think that that's also accurate. I guess I was a little overbold in that statement, but I certainly have felt like there have been times when the amount of time I've spent looking through documentation and then poking through code, especially if there happens to be a bug in the framework, it seems sometimes pretty similar.
Right.
There are no bugs in Ember though, so we're fine. I want to ask about the Ember event loop because I've heard cool things about that, and it also seems wild that there's an event loop inside an event loop.
I was going to say, doesn't JavaScript provide you with an event loop? So what's the difference?
It does, and we oh god, Yehuda's going to kill me. Yeah, we provide our own. We provide. You should probably have him jump on to talk about it because it's really part of the framework that I'm sort of least familiar with. I definitely spend a lot of my time more at the user-focused parts of the framework, so the router and the view hierarchy. I just trust that the run loop works.
So do you know why there is a run loop though? Because I don't know that.
You should bring Yehuda on because I think he'll give a better explanation of that.
We're like perfectly picking the questions to mess you up. Okay, what's an easy question that we can ask you that you can answer really well?
I want to ask about the APIs really quickly. You said that it's not even in beta yet, but people are still using it, and I can understand the draw if it solves enough of the right problems for you. But is the API, how much of the API is actually solid and sort of intuitive versus how much of it is still sort of an exploration of the problems and figuring out how to solve them before we actually fine-tune the API to communicate what we need?
It's we don't discuss pre-release software with the public, and no, it's that's a hard question to answer. I think the router is probably the last bit that needs to have the API tweaked, and we have some really good feedback from people who are using the current version. Other than that, I'd say the API is very, very solid. And actually, despite the size of the framework, I wish there was a way in documentation to sort of better tease this out, not just for Ember, but for everything. Like, there are definitely parts of the framework that you need to learn very quickly and you'll use a lot. Those are pretty small. Like, the amount of total surface area in Ember is quite big, but the amount that you're going to use on a daily basis or while learning is actually not significantly larger than Backbone. But it gets lost in the noise just because we don't do a great job of saying, like, all right, pay special attention to the router. You're going to want to use this part of the API. But like, how views clean themselves up, how templates render, all the various helpers that you could use. Like these are nice to have, and it's good to know that they exist when you run into these sort of specific problems that other people have had. But the actual parts of the API that you're going to use very, very frequently are pretty tiny.
All right.
Do you want to talk about those major parts that you need to know to use? You mentioned the router, but what else are they?
Definitely Ember's object system. You're going to want to learn how to create new instances of objects and create sort of reusable constructors for objects. We call them classes, but people get really, really upset when you mention classes in JavaScript, which is go back and you read about sort of the initial theory and design of prototypal languages. Actually, like Ruby's object system is very, very close to those goals. Like prototypal systems were essentially a reaction to very strict hierarchical class systems like C++ or Java had. But like in Ruby, the class is itself an object, and same with JavaScript, right? The constructor is itself an object. It happens to be a function. And so the object system, you're going to want to learn how to create objects and classes. We'll call them classes. I'm going to get flack for it, but that's all right. And then how to set and get properties. The binding...
Go ahead. Sorry, keep going.
The binding syntax, which is actually pretty simple. You take a normal property name like name, and you append binding, capital B, and then you can give it a string path that points to a different part of the application, and then those two objects will always stay synchronized. That's pretty much all that you need to know about binding at a typical layer. Like if you want to dig deep and see how bindings are being stored internally and how they affect the run loop and when they get scheduled, you can totally do that, but it's not really necessary on a daily basis to use it. You definitely want to become familiar with Handlebars, but Handlebars, is used by a number of projects. That's, by no means Ember specific. There are some Ember specific usages of it. So we have a few helpers for embedding views inside the template of another view. To get that sort of deeply nested view hierarchy working. And that's pretty much it. Everything else is, you use it when particular problems come up. And if you're having an issue, try searching through the API to see if we've provided a solution. If not, it's a thing that you need to solve yourself.
Ooh, I have a question about rendering and nested views. Just interested to see how Ember solves it. So if you have a bunch of nested views and you change something in like the daddy view, like the super parent view, how does it handle re-rendering all the child views? Or does it need to do it? Does it just know that only stuff in the parent view changed and it leaves all the events and templates and stuff the same in the child views?
It's a second part. So if you, we often get flack for this too. If you look at an Ember application in the wild and view the source, you're going to see script tags all over the place. We use a library called Metamorph for determining. So essentially we wrap parts of the application that we know are bound to data and may need to update in these Metamorph script tags, and then use either the browser's native range ability or what we've faked out in the Metamorph library to replace just those parts of the view that need to get updated. So if you're in a parent view and that has children and that has children and that has children, and a particular part of the parent view changes, only that would re-render.
That's sweet.
Yep. All right. Well, we need to get to the picks. We're about out of time. So let's go ahead and do that, and we will have AJ go first.
Oh, wonderful. So since I mentioned that I am in the DJ sphere, I'd like to give a shout out to Promo Only, which if you're considering doing DJing and you want legal copies of the music that are allowed to be used for whatever you want, because there's certain licensing restrictions on stuff like iTunes, and then CDs, maybe some of them have different licensing terms than others or something. It's a little wonky. But anyway, Promo Only is the subscription service where you basically get all of the music that hits the radio for $40 a month. So it's pretty decent. Of course, 90% of the music that hits the radio isn't worth $40 a month. Mm-hmm. But, it's good to have it legally and know that you get it like, boom, the day it comes out. So it's kind of cool.
All right, Jamison, what are your picks?
So my pick is TinyToCS. It's tiny transactions on computer science. It's a computer science journal where the articles fit inside a tweet. And it's really funny because they have abstracts that are like half a page long, and then the actual article is like a sentence. It's pretty sweet. I'll put the link in. I don't understand most of what they're about, but it's just kind of funny that you have these like really dense nuggets of information that fit inside a tweet that are new, novel computer science research.
Okay, cool. So I have a couple of picks. The first pick is HandBrake. I don't know if I picked it before, but I am pretty happy with it. I was able to convert, rip and then convert several of the DVDs that we have over to, I'm not even sure what MKV means, but that's the format that it converted it to, and then our Blu-ray player can play them. And so I actually can then get in and, just play it on the TV instead of on my iPad or something.
Speaking of our legal media.
Legal media, yeah. Well, I own the DVDs, so I don't see why there would be a problem. I'm not redistributing them or anything. If you are, I know. If you are going to redistribute them, I'm not going to admit to having used this for any content that I don't own, but a terrific way of getting content that I have used for legal things is BitTorrent, and on the Mac you can get a program called Transmission, which is really awesome. So if you are looking for content out there, I think you can get like the Ubuntu install disks and stuff.
Yeah, I've used it for that a couple times. There have been a few games that, like the Humble bundles that come out, those will release torrents as well, and that's really nice.
Yeah, it's super nice. So I really like BitTorrent as far as a transfer protocol. My last pick is, and there's kind of a funny story behind this, and maybe I shouldn't tell it because it happened during a client meeting, but we had this estimation meeting, and it was scheduled for 2 or 3 hours, and it wound up taking 5 or 6 hours. And honestly, 2 or 3 hours is way too long anyway. So we made a rule as a team that we would only discuss a story for 5 minutes, and then we would drop it dead and basically, not deal with it. So I got fed up with 6-hour meetings, and so I actually went and bought a Presto digital timer off of Amazon, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And the project manager actually threatened to reach through the phone and break my my digital or my timer because it kept going off every 5 minutes. But honestly, I find the digital timer much less obnoxious than a 6-hour meeting. So anyway, it did keep us on track most of the time, so it was kind of nice. So I'll put the link to that as well. Trek, what are your picks?
I have 3. Picks the hardest because I'm
mauled by a bear is less obnoxious than a 6-hour meeting.
You what?
Being mauled by a bear is less obnoxious than a 6-hour meeting.
Yes.
You guys ready?
Can you get bears over Amazon Prime?
Pardon?
That way I can get mauled and not go to the meeting. Anyway, Trek, what are your picks?
So picks are hard for me because I actually, despite the curmudgeon I play on the internet, I actually really like a lot of stuff. So I've pared this down to just 3. One is a framework for the browser for writing games called Crafty.js. I've just started to delve into game programming just as a hobby. And I don't know if this is the best one or even a good one. It's just the one that people kept recommending to me. And I've been having a lot of fun with it. And man, if you want to get your head into a totally different space than what typical like web or client development or server development is like, go do game development because it will be a bunch of stuff that you've never even thought about before. And really just sort of keeps you agile in the brain meets about thinking about things. So craftyjs.com is that one. The second one is About Face 3, The Essentials of Interaction Design. Pretty much the canonical interaction design book. Really, really good. This is the 3rd edition. It came out like 2007, 2008. Send a link to it if you want to put it in the show notes. And so I mentioned this because I think the style of applications that brought me to Ember have a lot more to do with client-side development as like a serious craft. And it's a fantastic book. Some of the examples are old. The first edition was from like 1996, but still a very, very good book. I'd say it's like 10% of a degree in HCI is just reading this book. And my third pick, so this involves things that normally would make me cringe. It's a self-published steampunk short story. And I think normally that would be just awful. But it's called Tucker Teaches the Clockies to Copulate. It's DRM-free. And this author did everything right. Extremely well written. It reads, it's poignant and funny, and it reads like sci-fi from the golden age. Really, really good stuff. DRM-free, indie author. He got an illustrator. The illustrations are just absolutely gorgeous. And this is an example of what I want publishing to be. It's everything I think self-publishing should become in the future, and it's $1.99.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's it. Are there any announcements you guys want to share? I'm assuming the companies you work for are still hiring.
Skype sucks. Yes.
All right.
That's true.
And also, I'm going to be doing the Intro to CoffeeScript online training. The early bird price is good through October 31st, which I think is actually going to be before this podcast goes out. But anyway, you can go sign up at intro2coffeescript.eventbrite.com, and then you can get trained on how to use CoffeeScript. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks for coming, Trek.
Thanks, guys. It's been fun.
And we'll catch you all next week.